Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show to end the week for you today. First and foremost, happy Juneteenth. We'll start off with a conversation on events occurring in Brazilian political system. President Jair Bolsonaro is under pressure from a worsening COVID-19 crisis. We'll see if this pressure translates into a worsening political position for him. Also, is there credible opposition on the left? And on a darker note, does Bolsonaro have enough military support to impose a fascist wonderland? A little later into the first hour, we'll delve into the unfortunate update on Brianna Taylor's case that has a positive twist to it, oddly enough. At least I believe there's a positive twist or a positive potential in what we saw yesterday. Also, the NYPD has taken the flagrant abuse of rights on the road. There is a surreal picture of the New York Police Department squad car driving on the streets of Paris. I'll leave it up to you to try to figure out why they are there. Last in the hour, we'll get into a discussion that I have been itching to have for several weeks now. Prison abolition. It's weird that we take prisons and cops as a foregone conclusion, as if some metric of the universe requires a grown man to tell another grown man to bend over and cough as just a natural plague to endure in a civilized, quote-unquote, world. Perhaps it's the plague that you have to endure when your society is steeped in inequality. There's a difference in those things. In the next hour, we'll keep the momentum going with an update on the latest polling. Fox News is supposed to be a safe haven for one Donald Trump. We'll see if it continues to be. Also, tens of thousands of bodies are still gesticulating in the streets and cities across America, patronized and placated with performative D-movie magical theatrical trash in lieu of a credible acknowledgement and a response from a rational government. That's not going to stop them from trying to get co-opted, meaning that's not going to stop the Democratic Party from trying to co-opt that movement, despite the fact that the political system has found no way to deal with the energy of that movement in any real terms. Last but not least, it is Friday. That means the hardest segment on the network. Come at me, bro. You feel strong. You got something on your chest. This is your day. This is your hour. This is your plunk second to speak your piece. This is always a good segment to end out the week. One of my favorites, actually. But let's start here. Pain. Deep, abiding, unrelenting, impersonal, absolute economic distress. For a moment, put yourself in the headspace. To the degree that you can put yourself in the headspace of someone working 40 hours a week and earning $13,000 a year with no savings. This is the federal minimum wage, $7.25. You are required to pay health care, a car note, a light bill, rent, food, and God forbid you get a ticket. Do you realize there are some areas of the country that use fines in order to pay for a significant percentage of their city's operations? If you lived in one of those cities, that city is literally, intentionally trying to criminalize the poor in order to avoid raising taxes on the rich. If you got a bill in that particular city, that would be a catastrophe. And you could end up in a debtor's prison because of such. Yes, debtor's prisons are supposed to be outlawed. However, if you have a bill that you don't necessarily pay, the court can put you in jail. That's not necessarily a good place to be in. Also, put into context, 40 million people are out of a job. And many of those people are the same people who are making $7.25 an hour. On top of those people being out of a job, if they're out of a job, they're also out of health care. If they're out of a job, they're also lost the ability to be able to pay for their rent. This is a catastrophe. Yes, you have a large number of people out walking in the streets, but those people out in the streets, yes, they're supplanting many of the issues that they have that they realize with their political system into this notion of Black Lives Matter. But I've started to hear more of class arguments being made at some of these rallies. Oh man, it gets my heart to flutter. The interesting thing, though, to get across how little your government cares, is that the government basically told you to kick rocks. And on top of telling you to kick rocks, when you had that clear demand of defund the police, they said, what did you want? They said, we want to defund the police. And whatever you thought about it, it was provocative, and it has started to break through in regards to the conversation. But beyond the defund the police argument, other events are taking place in your political system, especially within the context of people who are going to be thrown out of their homes, or for that matter, who have lost the ability to pay for the basic things that they need. These events are going to take place and come to a certain plateau in July. And I am believing that all of these things are going to start to merge, meaning in the same way that whites, blacks, gays, straights, Hispanics, all of them threw their bodies into the streets for the one cause of the African Americans, I would hope that African Americans do the exact same thing for them when they are being thrown into the streets. And again, many of the people who are going to be thrown into the streets are African Americans. Also, the thing that I'm bringing this up for is because that $7.25 an hour is such a measly sum, and yet that's a sum that some people have to literally live off. The government is giving a little bit extra money. And giving that little bit extra money, Republicans are angry and are bothered because Republicans want to create the incentives to force people back to work, even if COVID-19 is running rampant. In order to do that, they need people to be desperate. They need them to be hungry and thirsty and crawling in the desert without food or shelter. They need to compel those people based on the vulnerability of their needs to get back into work and to even fight to get back into work, something that will be against their interests. Why? Because the government didn't take rational actions to ensure that the public was made whole. And in this very specific instance, there's a person on CNBC that doesn't necessarily like the fact that the government is giving an extra $600 because why? Because that's $100 or $200 more than what they would typically get, and they believe that it's a disincentive. So they want to gut people who are making a bare minimum, and they want to make sure that those people only get the minimum wage and nothing above the minimum wage. Let's play the clip. Let's hear the clip.
But your thought at that point was that people on the front lines who were going back to work should have an incentive to actually do that, to get back in. What kind of progress have you made on that front since?
Well, for the last 6 weeks, Shirley, we've been talking about doing it now as part of the $600. But as I talk to you today, you know, the July 31st date is looming, and that's when the $600 ends. Democrats are insisting that there be $600 not just for the next month or so, but into next year. Republicans, for the most part, are insisting that the $600 end. I think there's a good way to deal with this, which is to say, let's have a lesser amount as a federal supplement to the state unemployment insurance, but then let's provide this bonus. I think we should have it right now. That doesn't seem to be happening because it's already a disincentive to work, the $600. But it creates an additional disincentive as the economy begins to reopen even further and there's more and more demand for labor. So,
you know what a disincentive is, Rob Portman? Disease. Dying of a disease. Especially when you have a situation where many of the people who look like me are dying 3-to-1. People who are susceptible to various illness like diabetes, heart disease, those people are dying at an illness of 3-to-1. Also, if you don't want to deal with the disincentive, your issue here is raising the minimum wage. If those people were making more money, you wouldn't have this notion of a disincentive. Do you realize $7.25, and he's complaining basically about people getting $100 or $200 more. Do you realize what they're going to do with that money? Dump it immediately back into the economy because those people are broke. Any money that they get, they will spend it directly into the economy. If you want to worry about the disincentive, what you should be asking for is to increase the wages. If you increase the wages, then you wouldn't have an issue with those people getting, $14,000 if it adds up over the course of a year. And then you are complaining that, no, $14,000, that's too much. We got to cut the wage. That's too much. Rich man Rob Portman complaining that somebody who's getting $100 more is getting too high off the hog. Get out of here. How sad of a person you are. These people are literally out here struggling. The people who you're talking about are literally people who don't have a job, or people who basically have been furloughed, people who don't necessarily and probably going to be kicked out of their house. And your response to this is they're making too much cash. No. If you want to deal with the disincentive of paying these people a little bit more, deal with it in the sense of raising the wages so those people would be more eager to go back to work. And the measly sum of money that you're giving them to subsist would not at that point be a disincentive to go back to work. Bob, this is horrible. Like a rich man who's basically saying these poor people are getting too much money. They're living too high off the hog with that $13,000 that they're making. That's astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're trying to talk sense into Rob Portman and Republicans right now. There's no sense to be had. These people have made up their minds. They want complete and utter control of capitalism. And this is where you kind of falls apart, this whole Elizabeth Warren idea. Like, I love markets. We just have to have rules to them. Well, there are no rules in capitalist America. The goal is to accumulate as much capital as you can. It's not about redistributing it so the economies can have money flowing through them so everybody can have access and opportunity and purchase and have a equitable marketplace. The idea is to get as much capital as possible. And so these big corporations we saw through the CARE program at the federal level was just redistributing the money directly to the bank. So to your point, if you gave people that are poor money, that money would just go back out into the economy. They would pay off mortgage bills, car bills, college debt. They would go and buy more food or possibly increase the amount of spending they have on basic retail spending, right? But what they say instead is, why would we even have the middleman of the person? Let's just give the money directly to the corporation and just save all of that time. And I think that's what is truly disgusting here, Jamal, is these people have no interest in actually helping people, supporting people, allowing that capital to flow to people when they can simply just capture it on their own. And so it does need to be highlighted here that the Republicans have no interest in doing it. It's also really just kind of discussing how they see human incentive. I think that's kind of your point. I think so many people are just like, oh, all those lazy people that'll people want purpose in their life. People want to work. People want to own, and they want to have pride in what they do. And so this constant disgusting trope, and it's incredibly racist here as we think about it on Juneteenth, of the black person or the person of color just sitting around, and if you gave them too much, they would do very little. That to me is incredibly disgusting. The other question, Jamal, just as we have a minute here, what happened to automation? I mean, wasn't the idea that robots and automation would come along and that not as many people would actually even have to work? And so this constant like gripe about, oh my God, they're not working or they're going to be disincentivized, when the whole idea of like creating a new economy, especially one here in the United States that's based around the service economy and service industry, isn't it fine for more people not to work and maybe have 4-day work days, 4-day work weeks?
Well,
I think we just need to rethink the whole idea of what work is. And right now, these people are just playing just tired politics and being racist.
Yeah, I mean, that gets to the whole thing of freedom, right? I mean, this is Juneteenth, emancipation. And, you know, what does emancipation mean? What does freedom in the real sense mean? And I would make the point that working 40, 50 hours a week is not freedom. And by the way, there's no point to doing that. Like, there's no higher objective other than making people cash. And fact of the matter is there's no cosmic point to life at all. We choose what we want to do, implicitly or otherwise. And in this case, we're choosing to make a tiny, tiny body of people very, very wealthy while us remaining massively vulnerable. I mean, think about it.
And in kind of what state does that leave a human being in when they're just working, grinding to work without a purpose or a point to it? And so eventually they just exhaust themselves. And then it's kind of like, well, wait, you were just working to make no point. There's no purpose of it. And then you get completely exhausted. You're not doing good work. And then your boss is on top of you, writing you up. I mean, these systems are so designed for failure. And then once you get written up and once you're fired from a job, there goes your resume. I don't know. I just always just laugh, Jamal, about how people are always attacking China for having like social ranking systems. When we have credit scores in the United States, we have resumes in the United States. We have very arbitrary hierarchies that people's careers can be completely destroyed and ruined by one former business employee who may fire them wrongfully, but that stays with you forever. And so this idea that people aren't socially and economically tracked here in the United States is absolutely absurd. And I guess I'm not sure how to work around those outside of Joe Biden's plan to have like another credit agency score people, which just seems so absurd and short-sighted. But ultimately, people are not coming up with answers. And that's kind of what's most exhausting about all of this and the Rob Portmans and others. It's simply just a kind of a debate around these tired, well, if we pay them more, we pay them less. Why are we not rethinking what work is?
Because they don't, for them, they got phenomenally wealthy off of the system. So why change it? And if it disadvantages somebody else, who cares? This gets to the whole thing, the conversation about the Columbus statue in a weird way, right? I mean, basically, the argument is my conscience tells me to throw this out because there's a secondary story to Columbus that you guys are flagrantly ignoring. And that's kind of what this is too. Your society has several outcomes that are horrendous. Like, the infant mortality rate for African Americans is astonishingly like it's you look at that number and those are just babies dying, and that's
and it's like your point with Christopher Columbus. It's like he did a thing that he's just maybe kind of fell upon finding some land, and it's same thing as a business owner, right? They create a business, they get a ton of praise, but then nobody looks at the fact that Columbus was testing how strong his swords were, how sharp they were, like cutting and scalping people, and then businesses running these horrific working conditions. Nobody kind of looks beyond that surface level here in capitalist America. Jamar, with that, we do need to take our first break of the hour. In the first hour, we will be talking about the blue flu and American police officers refusing to show up and do their jobs, the New York Police Department joining pro-police rallies in Paris, France, of all places. And later in the hour, we imagine a world without jails. Is it possible? Give us a call, 202-521-1320. And if that's not enough for you, don't you worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. You listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here.
Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. If you guys are digging what we are putting down, give up the like, give up the share. Also, hit the subscribe and notification button if you have not already done so. 47,897. This is the number of people in Brazil that have lost their life to COVID-19 virus. President Jair Bolsonaro has taken a Trump-like approach to the pandemic, which is to say, criminally negligent and directly culpable for the misery and unnecessary damage and inflicted on the population. The death toll from the virus is not the only stressor for Bolsonaro. Political intrigue has rocked his administration, starting with the shocking resignation of Justice Minister Sergio Moro. 2 additional health ministers have resigned, and now the Brazilian education minister, an ally to the president, Abraham Weintraub, has called it quits. To discuss the latest in Brazil, we're joined by Aline Piva, researcher and journalist based in Sao Paulo. Welcome to the show, Aline. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm
Haley.
good. Thank
Excellent. So I've been seeing protests all around the world. It's been pretty... Oh, I'm sorry, Aline. I apologize. I've been seeing protests erupt all around the world. And in seeing these protests erupt all around the world, I'm curious, is it something similar going on in Brazil in regards to like the Black Lives Matter, or is there something commiserate with those protests in Brazil?
Yes, absolutely. Just this week, there was a poll that was released. It wasn't actually a poll, but it was a research done by several universities in São Paulo, and that research showed that during the quarantine, this time that people are staying more at home, the police here in Brazil is killing over 10 people a day. 10 persons a day is being killed by the police. And there was several cases, at least 3 or 4 of those most recent assassinations that were minors. I mean, kids that they were either playing with their cousins inside their homes or visiting their grandmothers. They were just coldly assassinated by the police. That generated a lot of pushback by the communities. It's not as large as the protests in the United States or elsewhere, but still there's a lot of people who are organizing, especially in those communities that are being even more forgotten by the authorities and by the government now during this pandemic. Because as you said, things here are getting worse and worse, and we know that those communities where we have more violence carried out by the police are those that are also being more hit by the pandemic.
I'm curious. I keep saying I'm curious. Do you think that there's going to be any long-term, let's say, reorganization based on the protests? I mean, one of the questions that we have here in the United States is whether or not these protests are going to be able to get political gains. And I would imagine the same question is true there, especially if it's very specific and direct towards the notion of police abuse, or for that matter, police killings in the state, in the country.
Very hard to predict, but the Black movement here in Brazil is gaining more traction over this past decade. So I think this is something that might lead to even more, kind of gaining political power in the mainstream politics. But I think what is even more important is that for the first time, communities are being organized, like on the ground, from the base, and that gives a lot of more strength. Those movements. But the thing is that, again, not only the health crisis, but the economic crisis that we are living here in Brazil, it's huge. Takes a huge toll on those communities, and that makes it harder to keep people mobilized for a long time because they are struggling for their lives, like their livelihood, like daily basis. So I hope this has a good come out. This can be, more permanent mobilization, but it's hard to predict.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking a lot about that, Alini. It's one thing to protest here in the United States, and we obviously saw state repression and state backlash to what was taking place in the protest over the last few weeks, but it just doesn't compare whatsoever of the levels of violence in Brazil and how incredibly terrifying it is for so many political leaders. We've had obviously political assassinations here in the United States before, but it's at a much different degree there in Brazil. I am curious about kind of the chilling effect that so many people do have when it comes to going out on the streets and protesting and the significant violence. And then I want to kind of ask you to juxtapose that with what's happening with Bolsonaro right now and his cabinet members leaving him. And obviously there's being more fracturing within the right of Brazil. It seems like it would be just as ripe to go the other direction and things for things to actually turn more violent just as much as they could possibly progress forward.
Exactly. That's what it's the most worrisome of how the events are turning here in Brazil. Because on the one hand, you see people organizing, you see people mobilizing, you see people going to the streets and facing, very bravely facing the backlash from the authorities, the violence from the police, who is shooting not with live bullets, but with rubber bullets that we know it's as bad as live bullets can do that much harm. And what we see on the other side is that Bolsonaro is doing what, many analysts have been predicting this, but we were kind of hoping he would take a little longer to get to this point where he just turn into authoritarianism. He's just outright doing things without the scope of the Constitution, maybe even illegal. We just saw that one of his lawyers that attended the nomination of one of his ministers this week, the communications minister, this week, he was hiding. He was hiding a man that was being looked for by the police because he was involved in many crimes. So there is this kind of illegality of Bolsonaro doing whatever he needs to do to retain power, to continue in power, and even given even more power to the military. Which is something that for us Brazilians, we lived under a very harsh military dictatorship until 1985. So we have this recent history that is here, this authoritarian history, and we are seeing Bolsonaro taking that turn.
And Bolsonaro was part of that government, right? He was part of the fascist government that was in power.
He wasn't, but he was from the military. He was kicked out.
He was in the military.
Of the military, yeah. He was put into forced retirement, earlier forced retirement. He wasn't exactly part of that government, but he is connected to several people, and he has defended that military dictatorship on several occasions, and saying things like, the military dictatorship wasn't that successful just because they didn't kill enough. They had to kill around 30,000 more people. Then they would be successful. So the closing of Congress, the persecution, the political persecution, the killings, the tortures, he defends all that. And publicly and on several occasions. It's not something that he...
Just to piggyback off of, it sounded like it was a pressing fear, because I would imagine, like you said, the institutions are relatively new from the standpoint of a democratic institutions. You guys eventually had slid into authoritarianism. Are you concerned that that's like a legitimate concern? Meaning, do you believe that Bolsonaro has enough of the military to do something like that? And do you believe that there's some level of credible opposition in the country that could prevent something like that occurring?
That's the 1 million question right now. So look, on the one hand, what I think, my analysis is that the military do not want to be the face of this government. They don't want it to be in charge. They don't want it to be in power, like being the president or, ruling the country in an official position. But they are doing that de facto. They hold key positions within Bolsonaro's cabinet that amount to basically the country being ruled by the military without having to say that this is, a new military dictatorship. That's one side of the story. On the other side, we have a very scattered opposition right now here in Brazil. We have popular movements doing work on the ground. We have a few parties, but just this week there was a poll that was released that's showing that we don't even have 2/3. The opposition does not have 2/3 of the vote in the Congress to start anything against Bolsonaro or to try to hold him in or maybe curtail his authoritarian tendencies. He has the majority on both houses, and he still has a lot of support in the Brazilian society, even with all this happening, with all the deaths from the coronavirus and everything, he still holds his base very close to him and still supporting him. And the opposition it's not organized, doesn't have power on the streets, doesn't have power in the houses. So we are in a very complicated position. And again, Bolsonaro is still useful to those who elected him. He was elected with a very clear agenda that was to implement all these new liberal policies, and he's doing so quite well. Just yesterday, Waitrop, who renounced or was ousted, it was kind of a political arrangement at the end of the day. He ended the quotas for black indigenous people and other minorities for postgraduate degrees here in the country. And we know that was a policy that did a lot for social justice here in Brazil.
Yeah, and Aline, I mean, it's quite remarkable to keep in mind that Bolsonaro will be in office until at least 2022 with the elections, if nothing else changes. So he has plenty of time to continue to push his policies if he's not forced from office otherwise. With that, though, we do need to leave it here with Aline Piva, a researcher and journalist based in Sao Paulo. Aline, where can people find more of you and your work online?
I have articles on koha.org, and I also have a weekly show on knockout.blog.br.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was Aline Piva. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. If you guys are digging what we are putting down, give up the like and share this video. Also, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. If you want to join in the conversation, you can give us a chat, tweet, or call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. We have a caller. Charles, what's going on?
Hey, Jamal. I wanted to say, okay, if you've seen a contest for your leadership of your country and the contestants were Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and you were eligible to jump in that contest, wouldn't come upon you to do it? Like, if like, basically, okay, I just turned 35. I've been living in the United States my whole life, and I've been living in the United States for more than 14 years. So I meet all three of the qualifications to be president. The bar has been set so low. But because if Donald Trump can be the president, I can. I believe in Medicare for all. I'm Bernie Sanders, who's not good friends with Joe Biden. Only difference between me and Bernie is that I believe in Bernie more than Bernie did.
Yeah. That's sad, ain't it?
And
Charleston.
Go, Charles.
Oh, sorry. It went out. Are you still there?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, and they say change comes from the bottom. I'm the definition of the bottom. I'm just a regular American citizen. You know, I don't have any ties. The things that people are not going to vote for me for are the reasons that they should vote for me. I don't have any ties to big corporations or, you know, I don't come from academia. I don't come from Harvard and Yale. Look, how has that been working out for us? These people are at the wheel right now, the people from academia. They ain't doing a good job. So the things that should be a hindrance to my campaign, I'm going to try to use as an asset. My detachment from the system, my detachment from corporations and everything, those are the reasons people would say, oh, you ain't going to win. Those are the reasons I should win, is because I'm not coming from the establishment and nothing like that. And I just believe that it's incumbent upon me to try. Because like I said, if Joe Biden and Donald Trump is in a contest that I'm eligible to jump in, why wouldn't I jump in? Like
Charles, thanks for the call, man. I totally hear you. That was your 2-minute stump speech and announcement to be president. I don't remember who made the joke, and I wish I could credit him for it. I think it was a Gerard Carmichael or Michael Che, but they're basically joking about if you're a white male in America and you don't become president, haven't you kind of failed? Like if Donald Trump was to become president, if you do anything less than that, you're like kind of not making it anymore. Like the game is so stacked against everyone else that if you're not succeeding as a white male in America, like you have some pretty big issues, Jamal.
That's funny. Yeah, Donald Trump set the bar so low. It's like Obama gets it and it's like, wow, I'm never going to be president. And then Trump gets it. It's like, oh, yeah, you know, I have hope. So let's talk about a case from yesterday. And this was a big deal because people have been waiting for this. I have been waiting for this. These people need to be prosecuted. They broke the law. And I'm going to explain what I mean when I say they broke the law and what I'm talking about. So we've been waiting for a determination on whether charges were going to be brought against the officers that affected an illegal no-knock warrant that murdered Brianna Taylor in her own home as she slept in her bed with 6 bullets riddling her body out of 20 that they fired. Basically, the cops effected a no-knock warrant. They were trying to call it a quote-unquote drug raid. They said that they heard from a postal service worker that there was drugs. Now, the postal service worker said, we have no idea what that cop is talking about. Basically, the cop potentially just lied. The no-knock warrant in and of itself is illegal. And I'm going to explain what I mean by say illegal from the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court overruled it not legal. They knocked on the door, banged on the door, 12 o'clock at night, barged in, not identifying themselves, in plain clothes. Her boyfriend, defending the house, shoots one in the leg. They unleash 20 rounds. They hit her 6 times. Now, the catch here is they didn't care whether those bullets were going to go out the house. They didn't care whether those bullets were going to hit a baby. They didn't care whether those bullets, where they were going to go. And this is the same issue with Rashad Brooks, where you have these guys flagrantly just shooting. And you had, in that case, a bullet hit a person's car that the person was in the car. This is kind of my point where it's reckless. These bullets actually are going to go somewhere and land somewhere. In this case, 6 of them landed in her. Now, the Attorney General came out yesterday, and I saw the weirdest sight before he came out. They were boarding up the courthouse. Now, when you saw that, it was like, uh-oh. Now, typically, there's been zero tolerance for this notion of crime against African Americans over the last, X amount of time. And so in this case, this was going to be no different. They were concerned. Prosecutor comes out and says, I'm not going to say anything about the case. And people are like, what? And he believed that just not saying anything about the case in and of itself would have been enough for them to torch that building. That's how terrified they were. Now, to go further than this, and just to put a dovetail on it, he basically gives details about the case, but he doesn't necessarily say anything about the case in and of itself. He's still working on the case. I would make the point, though, that the fact that he's still working on the case in some degree means that he is looking hard. They are terrified, and they are trying to mitigate any notion of the public will being angry at something that they say, which means that they are uncomfortable. This is the position that we want government in. But the more interesting point is, he is in a weird box that if he is trying to go after these officers and trying to find something to get these officers on, it is very possible that despite the fact that the no-knock warrant has been outlawed by the Supreme Court, the fact that somebody shot at them may allow the cop to shoot back. In which case, it may be difficult to get it. I'll end it on this stat. 99% of the cop killings that take place are not charged. Of the ones that are charged, I think it's 33% that are convicted, and then of those, only 36% serve jail time. So if he's charging this, he may try to find something that he can actually get it to stick, because he knows that it is difficult to get those charges to stick. Bob, what do you think about this? I mean, basically, the no-knock warrant was outlawed by the court because they tried to say, basically, the home is this castle, and you have to give people enough time to understand that you are knocking on their door, and to understand and open up. You have to announce. Well, cops said, well, what about drugs? And then the judge said, okay, well, we'll give you the opportunity for drugs. But then the cops said everybody had drugs. And so the Supreme Court said, no, that is illegal. You can't do that. And yet, here we are, them effectuating that warrant. And I would argue that anything that happened after the commission of that warrant that was illegal should have also been illegal, meaning that should have been a crime. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I guess just for clarity, there are some states where there are 20 additional states where no-knock warrants are routinely granted, and so they are still granted. I think that was where in Louisville. In Kentucky, they went on to ban no-knock warrants as of June 11th. All 26 council members co-sponsored the ordinance, which they called Brianna's Law. And so it's basically a national fight around these issues tomorrow. Let's talk more about it after the break. We have a guest that I think can talk about that and much more in relation to police brutality, as well as prison and jails in the United States.
Give us a call if you want to no-knock warrant for a moment, though, after we come back.
Great, Jamal. 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber here, sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas, continue to bring you live programming daily from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're almost out of here for the week. We'll enjoy a quick weekend of protest. I am sure I'll be out there on the streets. I'm sure Jamarl Thomas will be out there as well, and hopefully see all of you out there. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We continue to see an absolutely amazing cultural moment here in the United States, and I've been amazed to see major U.S. newspapers give words and space to the movement. We can debate whether or not it's sincere reckoning with history or it's a savvy business move to make money, but nonetheless, the words are being printed and distributed. The New York Times ran an opinion piece by Robin D.G. Kelly, an American history professor, titled "What Kind of Society Values Property Over Black Lives?"
Yes.
In the article, Kelly writes, "Our country was built on looting, the looting of indigenous lands and African labor. African Americans, in fact, have much more experience being looted than looting. The long histories of race riots in America in Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Detroit, New York, Memphis, D.C., and Tulsa, Oklahoma more closely resembled anti-Black pogroms than ghetto rebellions. White mobs, often backed by the police, not only looted and burned Black homes and businesses, but also maimed and killed Black people. Here to talk more about the foundations of America, and more specifically the usage and role of America's jails and prisons, is Eteng Etta, a community organizer with BYP Black Youth Project 100 DC chapter. Eteng, thank you for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Happy Juneteenth. Thank you for having me.
Happy Juneteenth. Thank you for being with us. Before we dive deeper into the work of BYP 100 and your current demands around prisons, jails, defunding the police, and much more, let me ask you, Eteng, what kind of society values property over Black lives?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more American than what we're seeing right now. And so throughout this country's and insidious history towards Black folks, there's so many examples we can point to where the property of the state is much more valuable than Black people. We see this in, policies. We see this in the fact that we pour so much money into policing and prisons, which disproportionately impacts Black people, which is by design, right? And I appreciate the commentary around this moment where it feels like a lot of folks are understanding that it's not just a coincidence that at every turn of America's history, and also just if you look at 2020 alone, that there's nothing more American than the systemic disenfranchisement of Black people. And so the state has always been much more concerned with keeping the peace as a tactic and strategy to make sure that Black people are not able to amass political power, economic power, etc. And we see that in the protection of property. It's one of many examples of white supremacy's goal, which is to make sure that folks fall in line. And we know that coupled with that history of America valuing property more than Black people, at the same time, Black people have been resisting for all of time as well. And so what we're seeing play out is no different.
Yeah, Eteng, let me dive then into the demands and movement and campaign you all are launching to fight against the state and the history of the United States. You have a new campaign in partnership with BYP 100 and Black Lives Matter. You all have three demands: divest from police, invest in community safety, and create police-free DC schools. The first demand reads, reject the proposed $18.5 million increase to police budget here in Washington, D.C., including the $2.5 million dedicated to putting more police in schools and the $5 million dedicated to building a new jail. Reduce the NPD budget each year until we get to zero. Let me play devil's advocate before you get into this first demand. And I basically want to ask what I've heard from other people when these demands are presented. They say, won't there always be crime? Is there not some set of the population that will need to be removed from society to keep others safe? And what about the current jail in D.C.? The conditions are horrific, no air and no proper services. Do you not want better conditions for those currently incarcerated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to that I would say, ironically, when people say that, as an abolitionist, I too am interested in making sure our communities are safe and that people have what they need. And we know that violence that takes place in communities is a symptom of deep disinvestment in the things that people need in order to be safe and be able to live a dignified life. I'd also say, right, if we really, really unpack, take a deep look at police and prisons, those two things do not address the root causes of why violence happens in communities. So, if you find yourself in a situation where you need support, police come after things have happened. There's no preventative measure that police presence has. So even if they're not physically brutalizing people once they are called to the scene, it's already happened, right? And so we need to look at the actual root causes of what causes violence. And oftentimes, if you look in communities where you have access to housing, to education, to economic opportunities, it's not a coincidence that folks are able to live lives free of violence. Same with prisons, right? So when something happens, you just disappear someone from the community. And so we never ask the person who's on the receiving end, is that actually helpful to you? Because if someone, let's say someone takes some money from you, the state will disappear that person, but there's no guarantee you actually get that money back, or there's no guarantee or conversation around what does it actually look like for harm to be repaired. And so police and prisons just are absolutely not effective. And that's even before we factor in the fact that police themselves are perpetuating violence. And so they're a violent entity. It's not a coincidence. It's not if it's not violent. So
yeah, so much of it is just a self-fulfilling prophecy that we've fallen into, right? It's like, we're going to build a jail. Oh, the jail's coming. Why should we address the social issues that would lead to somebody having to be housed in the jail? We already started building the jail, and then all of a sudden we're not addressing the root causes, as you're saying. We're just building jails without even thinking about what's going into it. I'm also really amazed that people don't understand the cost of incarceration. If you want to just make a simple economic issue, we've talked plenty about how it's not cost effective to be incarcerating people. Our labor and time, which is translated into taxpayer dollars, are being incredibly wasted going into systems that aren't actually rehabilitating or making our communities safe. Just to give you a sense, there was a report from Prison Policy Initiative that found that the cost of federal, state, and local corrections in the entire police and court systems in 2017 was $265 billion, Jamar Thomas. So again, if you want to make an economics issue of like what's cheaper, actually getting somebody a house that they can live in safely and have their own dignified life, or put them in a cage, the dignified life with the house is actually cheaper than putting somebody in a cage. Why are we still putting people in cages?
Well, that's the question. I mean, why are we putting people in a cage? I think that's the operative question. I mean, I've made the argument that basically cops are about law and order. They're not necessarily about this notion of good, ethics, right, wrong. Law and order. If it was, if it was apartheid, it would be maintaining apartheid. If it was Jim Crow, it would be maintaining Jim Crow. I am curious, though, from the standpoint of looking at it from, let's say, the governmental part. Bob is making a really good point that basically it costs a certain amount of money and there's a certain amount of violence just in standing still, meaning just like not doing these various things to keep our communities up, to make sure that the communities are thriving and so forth, that we basically lose out on those things. So why, from your standpoint, why do you believe that our system is that way? Meaning, why do you believe that there's that bias or that skew towards not dealing with the income inequality in the various communities to ensure that those communities are thriving, as opposed to just throwing in cops in order to handle something that they basically can't handle?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that it's always going to be easier to just kind of push things under the rug, and that's essentially what we do when we put people into cages. Whereas it's going to be a harder conversation and a harder road to really take a deep critical look at what does it look like to be able to provide everyone with housing, with healthcare, with nutrition. And it's going to bring up a lot of skeletons out of America's closet. Like this is when we talk about just the criminal justice reform or criminal justice system, it's with so many things. And so I think folks are feeling pretty daunted around the fact that, if we take the step to move towards a world without police prisons, that's also going to require us to abolish and dismantle a whole slew of other things. And so folks in power right now overwhelmingly, are not interested in rocking the boat. It's much easier to maintain a status quo and just to have Black people continue to be scapegoats. And so, it makes me think about how police and prisons, they have a really great propaganda machine. So they make it seem like we can't live in a world without them, and that's on purpose. And so whenever folks are rising up and starting to question, what is the point of police in prison? You know, we have our government officials, we have police themselves, and also mainstream media coming together and being like, no, we need to quell and squash this dissent, because if folks, you know, are able to achieve this world without prisons and police, well, there's going to be a slew of other large shifts that folks are going to demand. And so I don't think our folks in power are definitely terrified of the people power that we're seeing right now. But they know that this is going to be the tip of the iceberg, and there's going to be a lot of other significant shifts that are going to need to happen. So
I mean, I think you start shifting people's consciousness, and I'm curious so far with these demands. You can talk about the other two: invest in community safety, create police-free DC schools. But I'm always fascinated at just what people think prisons and jails are. I'm often always shocked to talk to police officers, and they talk about how frustrated they are that they're just arresting the same people, and they're always like, well, we always send them to jail. We think they're going to be reformed. We think they're going to get a house, and we think they're not going to be back on the same streets. So it's amazing that police officers somehow think that like all of it's still working, even though they see on a daily basis that they're encountering the exact same people. And then we also have plenty of people in the United States that say, well, aren't jails always inevitable? And when you say to them, don't you want to have a more peaceful society? You always get people kind of saying, well, no, there's always going to be inherently evil people. It's like people are almost conditioned to be afraid of a more peaceful society.
Mm-hmm.
Good way to put it. Perfect way to put it.
And I mean, when you look at the types of people who are imprisoned, like, and then that's when we see like racism, sexism, transphobia, because the types of folks who are already marginalized for a variety of different reasons are the people that are disproportionately locked up in prison, and are the people that, you know, white folks in particular are very scared to have in their communities.
You know, that's interesting. And I love the way that Bob put that. Basically, people are scared to want peace. And I think what it boils down to is if I have a weapon, then almost you need to have a weapon to level off. I mean, think of it as a missile treaties, for example. We will put a missile treaty, or we will put a missile in the sky, and then Russia would have to put something up. China would have to put something up. India would have to put something up. It is real in the sense of saying until everybody is at peace, nobody is at peace. How do you foresee something like that taking place in regards to an edging off of a prison system? I mean, I guess in my head, I look at it as say, well, you need to make sure those communities are whole. If you have statistical information showing that there's a crime issue, or that there's negative outcomes from a standpoint of health, I mean, even gray matter of children having brain abnormalities just from issues of poverty. If you see that, and your society just says, okay, we're going to accept that and throw in cops, that is horrendous. But that is what happens, and that creates a certain degree of chaos in the society. There's a direct correlation between income inequality and violence. So how do we make that shift from where we are to that place?
And Etienne, let me also just ask you, with about 30 seconds left, where can people also find more of you and your work online?
Yeah, so there's a couple places where folks can plug into the Defund MPD campaign. So we have a website, defundmpd.org, which has a lot of great information that breaks down our 3 demands, which you mentioned, as well as includes a toolkit where we've been regularly updating content there for folks to share on their social media, since it's really important that, you know, folks join and are vocal in this campaign. We've also outlined a number of different opportunities for folks to testify for the DC Council. It's budget season, and so we need folks to know that, like, the time is now to really...
Eteng, apologies for cutting you off here. We are at the end of the hour. We got to get out of here. Thank you again. That was Eteng Etta with BYP's 100 DC chapter, BYP 100 DC chapter. Thank you again. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We got a second hour of news, politics, and culture right after the break. We're in DC and back after this.
to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber, here sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas. Man, Jamarl, we're flying through the show today on our second hour. We got one more hour for all of you misfits out there. Give us a call, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. You always can tweet us at Sputnik Misfits, and you can always head over to the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel and check out Jamarl Thomas's great feed there, where you can catch Political Misfits as well as the Progressive Soapbox throughout the day, 24/7. Jamarl Thomas is always up and doing the news.
Doing the news. Real men can't sleep. Real men do the news.
Lots to cover over the next hour here, including Democratic infighting, Trump's rally in Oklahoma, and the efforts by just about everyone to co-opt the Black Lives Matter movement. Give us a call or tweet 202-521-1320. Joining us for the next 30 minutes, our good friend here, Ted Rall, author and award-winning political cartoonist. Ted, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ted, I do not want to bury the lead. You have a new book out, Political Suicide, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, which looks at the internal divides of the Democratic Party. The book seems like something long in the making, and I know a lot of us political misfits are desperate for the Democratic Party to break up. First, tell us more about the book, but second, I'm curious if you think that Joe Biden's latest poll numbers against Donald Trump, a Fox News poll has him up 50-38, if the Democratic Party will be able to distract with its own shortcomings by focusing on the shared external enemy of one Donald Trump.
I'll answer the second question first, which is something I like to do just to be confusing. And so I think Biden's obviously ahead in the polls, but let's not forget, Trump's 38 is rock solid. And although I guess that's somewhat belied by the fact that it was 44 a few weeks ago, but it's pretty solid. It's certainly more solid than Biden's 50 or 53 in some polls that I've seen. So, I mean, I would not say by any means that we can say Biden is a shoo-in at this point, although it's certainly, from historical standpoint, this is the kind of lead Democrats like to see go at the stage. They need a good, solid 12-point lead to defeat the Republicans in the fall. But this is a very unusual election, and the question is, are people going to go out during a potential second wave of COVID and literally risk their lives to vote for Joe friggin' Biden? I don't know. I mean, that remains to be seen. I'm skeptical. I think it might just take a little bit of a drizzle to keep me home from voting for Biden. In fact, I think nothing would make me vote for him. And so it's the enthusiasm gap is big. In terms of the book, Political Suicide, which is now available for pre-order, it's officially out next week. It's a look at the history of the attempts of the progressive movement to work within the Democratic Party, and it sort of project out what's likely to happen in the near future. So we look at candidacies like George McGovern being the last true progressive who ever ran for as the Democratic nominee for president. And then we move on to failed candidacies, insurgencies like that of Howard Dean in 2004, and of course Jesse Jackson's historic race in 1984 and 1988, which the details of which have largely been forgotten, but it was kind of a stunning achievement. And John Edwards' totally forgotten run in 2008, and how the Democratic Party got basically the corporatist neoliberal wing pushed out and rejected these progressive insurgencies. And it wasn't really until 2016 that Bernie Sanders got major traction, and that the progressive left was able to actually move the party to the left by withholding their votes in the 2016 general election. And that forced the entire 2020 slate to move to the left and embrace things like not single-payer health care, but Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, student loan forgiveness. The vast majority of candidates like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, who are corporate neoliberals, had to pay lip service to the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, which amounts to about 70% of Democratic voters. So the book is a look at that, and it's a look at whether progressives can really get anywhere within the party, and whether the party is headed for a split into a new progressive party and a rump Democratic party.
Yeah, Ted, I just want to ask you on one issue there, because I'm just a couple years younger than you. I was Jesse Jackson. I wasn't alive during the first run up the presidency in '84, and then I was a few years old there in '88. But I was always amazed looking back on his policy platform and his run compared to Bernie Sanders' policy platform, and everybody always talking about how Bernie Sanders was the most progressive, most radical runner forever within the Democratic Party. But then I look at Jesse Jackson and I'm saying to myself, it seems like the guy was to the left, or at least had a different philosophical approach towards running for office amongst the Democratic Party. Is part of history and the corporate Democrats' role been to basically eliminate the history of what Jesse Jackson was trying to do to try to paint themselves as progressives, as if there was nobody sitting to their left this whole time?
Definitely, and there is no better evidence of that than one anecdote, which is that Jesse Jackson offered to help Obama campaign for president. Let's not forget, Jesse Jackson was a powerhouse in Democratic machine politics as well, and Obama wanted nothing to do with him. Totally kept him at arm's length throughout the 2008 race, and didn't use him because Obama came out of that Democratic Leadership Council wing of the Democratic Party, the moderate wing. So, yeah, I think they're trying to erase that history. I mean, for sure, Jackson was to the left of Sanders, but hey, the whole Democratic Party and certainly the Republican Party have moved consistently to the right over the last 50 years. I mean, let's not forget, we're looking at a country that has not had a major anti-poverty initiative or bill proposed by either party in about 50 years, not since LBJ was president. And, we forget that. It's just like, well, poverty is now something that you're supposed to take on yourself. Basically, the government's not going to help you. That didn't used to be the way we looked at poverty in this country.
Yeah, Jamal, it was fascinating, too, reading this Fox News poll, just showing that Biden is opening up quite a bit of leads there amongst people under the age of 30, black voters, suburban areas, women, voters over the age of 65, and even Trump's lead amongst evangelical Christians and rural voters starting to diminish a little bit. So the numbers aren't great for him. Obviously, these aren't set in stone, and they're just kind of barometers for what's happening. But the one poll number I thought was extremely interested in polling on Fox, what they conducted here, they found that people that were extremely interested in the election, 81% of respondents were concerned about racism, and another 64% perceived racism as a major threat to the stability of the country. That's on par with the coronavirus pandemic. 67% said it's a major threat, and unemployment, also 67% of people said a major threat. So lots of threats, lots of mishandling things for Trump is good for the Democrats in the moment. But once they're in office, as Ted's saying, Jamal, they don't have a plan for racism. They don't have a plan for addressing the coronavirus pandemic, and they don't have a plan for the economy. So sure, even if Democrats win here in November, they then get in office and people are going to say, well, what the hell do you have to offer? And they're going to kind of look around and say, well, we're not Trump.
Yeah, that's what they're going to say. We're not Trump. I mean, they're going to, if Trump loses, they're going to use Trump as a boogeyman for the next X number of generations, screaming least worse, trying to get that much more momentum behind least worse. And here's the catch. Because they move so far to the right, the boogeymans get worse. Ted Cruz is waiting in the wings. Tom Cotton is waiting in the wings. And that incentive for you to vote for those monsters on the Democratic side get that much worse. I mean, that much more pressing. Ted, when you wrote that book and you were looking through the various political campaigns and everything else in regards to who do the lefties that tried to win something in the party, were they at any point successful? Because I understand you're saying but Sanders, but basically Sanders was able to seed the public with something. I would argue that those people who are out there in the streets now, Sanders. And I would argue that the people who are pushing for Medicare and all this, Sanders, the 88% support for Medicare in the Democratic Party, that was to some degree activists and Sanders kind of dovetailing on that stuff. But the leadership, no go. The leadership is pushing Cobra. Joe Biden is not pushing Medicare for all, meaning the people who are in the lead or who are in the position of authority to kind of make those choices have chosen No, and has not cared one iota what the public thinks, because what Joe Biden knows is that 60% of the people voting for him are doing so only because he's not Trump, meaning he doesn't have to give you any kind of policy at all. That's so sad. What level of success has there been when you look back over history about lefties trying to work in the context of the Democratic Party, or has there been success at all?
Well, by the way, if Biden wins with this "I'm not Trump" against the incumbent approach, it'll be the first time in modern electoral history that anyone unseats a sitting incumbent with that approach. I mean, there's a first time for anything, but it's just, first time. You don't want to bet on a first time for anything kind of approach. Historically, I think the Sanders is so notable precisely because of what you said. He actually did move the needle. Other insurgencies were impressive in their own ways. I mean, if the rules hadn't been changed at the convention in 1980, might well have replaced Jimmy Carter, who was wounded by the hostage crisis in 1980 as the Democratic nominee. It's pretty impressive for the president to be thrown out. And certainly Howard nationalized the healthcare discussion in a way that had never been done. In terms of policy changes that affected the mainstream party, absolutely not. Nothing changed.
Ted, you're breaking up a little bit there. Let me just grab a caller who is on the line here. Tyrese, you're still here with us?
Yes, I'm sure am. How you doing?
Tyrese, we're good, man. How you feeling?
Feeling good. I'm feeling good. Look, I got 3 comments. The first comment, people, please do not forget about Flint, okay?
That's right.
And a second, dealing with the movement that's in the streets, Black Lives Movement that's in the streets with all the energy we have and need to expand to healthcare. Reversing that 3 strikes law with all those people in prison for snapping bars of food. They need to be released. Repealing Patriot and Pfizer, get rid of that. We are overhauling the law enforcement. I'm talking about CIA, FBI, and local police. Poverty as well. Healthcare, right? Public option or single payer. And my last comment was, since I got that out, and also back in Jackson Ventura, third party candidate. My last comment is this. Okay, Bolsonaro and Putin spoke last week. It seemed like Bolsonaro is starting to lean more to the east now. And it's about agriculture and energy and space. The first 2, Wall Street do not like that. The last one dealing with space, let me tell you something. Brazil is not that far from the equator. Now, from what I understand, in rocket science, it's better to launch rockets from there around the equator because of less gravity or some weird stuff dealing with physics. So, Mike Pompeo you will see him start going down there to talk to Bolsonaro. That's all I want to say today.
Tyrese, always appreciate it, man. Thank you for giving us a call. I'm going to pivot slightly because I agreed with everything you had to say, that there is quite a bit to do and it's not that hard to come up with these plans.
Yeah.
Ted Rall, I did want to ask you here about the Republican Party that's out and about. We can't forget about them. It seems like Donald Trump it doesn't seem like Donald Trump is heading back to the campaign trail tomorrow, Saturday in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the city of Tulsa is shook. The city of Tulsa has put into place a curfew late Thursday night that will last Friday and Saturday as the city prepares for Trump's rally, Donald Trump's first rally in nearly 3 months. The curfew only affects the immediate area surrounding the downtown BOK Center where Trump's rally will take place. Trump tweeted here, any protesters, anarchists, agitators, looters, or lowlifes who are going to Oklahoma, please understand you will not be treated like you have been in New York, Seattle, or Minneapolis. It will be a much different scene. Confused what that means in Seattle, shooting like rubber bullets and tear gas. New York, they were beating people and hitting them in the face. In Minneapolis, I don't know, the police department killed a man there. So what exactly are you insinuating? Maybe you'll be peaceful to I don't know. Obviously, it's not going to be peaceful. Anyways, Ted, the curfew is ordered by the Tulsa Mayor Bynum, a Republican, and is in effect from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. for Friday and Saturday. It feels like to me, Ted, these curfews at this point seem like they only add fuel to the fire. Plus, it's pretty ironic that the party that is for smaller government is having their government control what time people can and cannot be out of their homes.
Well, I agree with you about curfews. That certainly was the effect here in New York, where I am. And it just emboldens the police to close everything down and do sweeping mass arrests and so on. So it's. I will say though, the politics of the rally should not be underestimated. I mean, it might seem insane and absurd to have a socially undistanced mass rally that supposedly had 1 million people asking for tickets, according to the Trump campaign, which is bigger than the population of Tulsa. Obviously, that's probably not true, but it seems like a crazy thing to do. But it's generating exactly what the Trump campaign needs and wants, which is excitement, something that is absolutely missing from the Biden campaign. People are looking at Joe Biden as a dutiful vote. It's like take your medicine and you can get rid of the evil orange man. But it's in terms of Donald Trump, he's actually got his people energized. Feel like going to see him and hear about him is an event, and you can be sure this will be covered in a way that Biden's missives from his basement just can't be and aren't going to be.
Yeah, I mean, Jamar Thomas, one of the hottest tickets in all of Oklahoma. They said the Trump team said they had nearly 1 million requests for tickets for the BOK Center, which holds 19,000 people. As Ted mentioned there, people will not be required to wear a mask, even though a mask will be given out along with hand sanitizer. People won't be forced to stand 6 feet apart. The campaign we had also talked about is requiring all attendees to sign coronavirus waivers. It's quite incredible the fact that they're doing these rallies. And then the next one they're trying to go back to Jacksonville, Florida for Trump's acceptance speech for the presidency. And we just saw now there's 4,000 new cases of COVID in Florida yesterday, the highest single day count, another peak. And here these guys are bringing everyone together and standing right next to each other. And we know obviously the mask aren't an end-all be-all to the spread of the coronavirus. Is a mitigating factor. It's a psychological factor. It's not keeping the virus from spreading writ large. So what do we do when we start to see the coronavirus outbreaks after these, or just adding more fuel to the fire?
Yeah, we just accept it at that point. I mean, the catch is, it's hard to, and it's not entirely true. People who were protesting actually were wearing masks. Some of them were wearing gloves because they basically believed in science. You have a skew in regards to Republicans, like 20-30% that says, I don't want to wear that mask, which turned it into this kind of weird political thing, something that was basically a science thing in order to try to prevent the spread of a virus. And so I suppose people are going to get sick. They're going to be incubators, moving around society, getting people ill. That's, the worst case scenario. With Trump doing this is getting Trump some buzz. But Trump is inundated with all sorts of things from the standpoint of COVID-19, meaning public disagrees with him. Like you said, 80% of the public believes that there's a race issue. Isn't that amazing? Like at the height of the civil rights movement, that number wasn't at 80%. And which means that they look at Trump and say, you screwed this up also. This looks like a hard way for Trump to go with this. How could Trump win this? If Trump did an about face, if you were talking to Trump, just whispering in his ear, what would you tell him as a way of saying, okay, this is how you can pull this out of the fire, Trump?
Ted Rawl, what do you think?
Ted Rawl, yeah, I'm sorry.
I think it's the economy stupid. I think he's got to pour money and stimulus into people's pockets and make them think that he saves them from being evicted and foreclosed upon, losing their homes and becoming homeless. That's the crisis that's facing us right now. We're staring down the barrel of a mass eviction and foreclosure crisis because the $600 a week supplemental unemployment checks are going to run out at the end of next month. Senate doesn't seem to have any appetite for renewing it. Democrats are not making a serious push for anything new. So anything that comes out of the reconvened Congress after 4th of July is going to be anemic and insufficient to address the needs of tens of millions of people who are literally unable to pay their mortgages and their rents. And I think that's going to be the movement that next hits the streets. I mean, it's not, this is a perfect storm politically for the state, because not only, of course, was George Floyd one murder too many for many white people, but also white people are paying more attention. They're sitting at home watching the news, sheltering in place, and there's no distractions. There's no sports, there's no movies, there's no restaurants, there's no art walks. They're paying attention to the news because the news is all that's happening. And people are going to be honing in like a laser on an eviction and foreclosure crisis that most people can look at and say, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Yeah. And there's going to be solidarity around this, and I think it's going to be a big political issue going into the fall and the winter.
Yep, give us a call here, Political Misfits, 202-521-1320. It'll be interesting to see where that hits as plenty of cities across the United States try to enter into the phase 2 of reopening here in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Things are starting to open back up, and for me, it's always a kind of that fear is once people are allowed to look away, there are distractions, will they stop paying attention? And I appreciate you mentioning there, Ted Rawls, one too many murders of black people for white people. Black people have had enough for quite a while. Ted Rawls, you're in New York City. I wanted to pivot a little bit to talk about your men in blue, the finest there, the New York Police Department. 2 stories out here. One, there are letters and flyers being circulated urging NYPD members to strike. One is a sick out that is being planned allegedly here for July 4th. The flyer reads, NYPD cops will strike on July 4th to let the city have their independence without cops, says the message, which is being passed among cops via text, according to sources. Another flyer calling for a strike on the same day complains about police being vilified and painted as the bad guys by local government and media. It tells New York's finest to use their unlimited sick leave to call out that day. And in a second, we got 2 NYPD stories here for you, Ted Rawls. In a second one, yesterday, some massive NYPD budget was on display in Paris, France, where apparently representatives of the department's international liaison program rocked up to a pro-cop demonstration in Paris in an NYPD squad car. So you have the NYPD basically saying, don't call us names, and if you call us names, we're going to take our ball and go home, while at the same time they have such a large budget that they can be attending pro-police rallies in other countries.
$6 billion. Wow.
You call us whatever you want, but don't call us late to dinner at a 4-star restaurant in Paris. There's the thing that I think there's nothing funnier than the idea of the police going on strike. It's like, please take as much time as you want. Really, you guys look tired from beating people and shooting them. Just really take the year off, take the decade. Don't let the door hit you on the tuchus. It's kind of like asking prison inmates if they're going to be sad if the corrections officers go on strike. It's like, please, 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 it's fine. I mean, probably 1% of police work is actually, and I think I'm being generous, involves actually protecting anyone from crime. And 90% of it is abusing people and revenue enhancement, issuing BS, a bunch of garbage that nobody needs. We're all better off without them. Please go on strike. Maybe coronavirus will go on strike too. That'd be great.
It's quite remarkable, that threat. Go ahead, Jamar.
No, I was just saying that's hilarious. I mean, but you're right, Bob. It is there. New York has what, a $6 billion budget for the cops? That number is astonishing when you think about it. And you can think of what could that money be used for. Ted, so if in a situation where, let's say, someone has the great idea of, hey, what if we just defund the cops and we take this money and put it into something else? What would be the things that they could put it into basically to augment and negate some of the needs for the cops? Whether that's New York, whether that's California, just in general.
I think the way you look at this is look at the communities that quote unquote need, or let's just say have a lot of policing. And what's the difference between those communities and communities that don't need a lot of policing or don't have a lot of policing? If you live in Bel Air or Beverly Hills or East Hampton, what kind of things do those communities not have? What do they have that communities that are heavily policed don't have? And what those are excellent schools, job opportunities. The infrastructure is taken care of. To the extent that broken windows ever meant anything, part of it is true that, for example, broken things tend to beget more broken things. And, so like there should be so much more money dedicated to, I would start with the schools. Urban schools are woefully underfunded, and that's why a lot of white people don't like to send their kids there. A lot of them aren't racist. They just, don't want to socially experiment with their own children. That could, you can change outcomes that way. For everybody. $6 billion would go a long way in New York's public school system. When I had a kid 16 years ago, I lived in Manhattan. I left Manhattan because the school system was such a disaster. You have to literally apply to get into an elementary school. Why should you have to apply to get into a public elementary school or a middle school or a high school? I mean, public education is your right, and it should be equal, excellent quality, regardless of where you live. And it's not. I mean, you could just go on and on.
I think the other thing that has to be noted, though, is government's failing all around us as well. And so we would also have to come up with alternative systems, both within holding government accountable. I was talking about fireworks yesterday and explosive safety as we come up on July 4th. And every government agency you talk to here just simply says, well, go talk to the police. And you're saying, well, wow, if we got rid of the police, that means the other government agencies who are already being tasked to do this work would have to be held accountable. And I think that's a whole other conversation, that it's not as if some of these other alternative systems are just sitting there. They would have to be built, and there would have to be a transitional process to plug into, at least in my opinion. Ted, Raul, I wanted to get to one last story that we have just enough time to get to with your time. It broke yesterday as we were signing off, so I did want to circle back and get any of our listeners' take. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. But it is in regards to Facebook removing Donald Trump campaign ads for being here. Shocker, a bit too racist. Facebook removed 88 ads posted by the accounts of Donald Trump, the Trump campaign, and Vice President Mike Pence that Facebook said were violating our policy against organized hate. All of the identical ads featured an upside-down red triangle, a symbol used by the Nazi Party in World War II to identify political dissidents in concentration camps. A Facebook spokesman wrote in an email statement that the post violated the company's policies, quote, saying here, our policy prohibits using a banned hate group's symbol to identify political prisoners without the context that condemns or discusses the symbol. Ted, I mean, wait, what? This one feels a little bit like the white power okay sign that some of the folks will flash or allegedly flash on certain occasions. This feels a lot like, could it have been an accident? But at the same time, are Trump's ad makers that openly racist to the point of using Nazi symbolism?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
and
crazy. Yeah, it's just wild. I mean, I just can't believe it,
They're strong, and there's, unlike most of the cabinet, they're actually smart enough to know the historical references. And so they're doing this on purpose. It's dog whistles, and it's disgusting. And I just want to say, for the record, my grandfather wore one of those exact upside-down triangles at Buchenwald. And so I take that, very, very seriously. I'm well aware of that history. And it's he was a communist. He was in the French Resistance, and a hero of my family. And it's to be baiting Antifa with this symbol, and which is, by the way, not their symbol, contrary to what the Trump administration goons have said, is just, it's beneath contempt. And what's even more astonishing to me is how even the Democratic Party doesn't seem to have much to say about this. I have yet to, if Nancy Pelosi has had anything to say about this, I have yet to hear it. And, they sort of let it go and shrug their shoulders. I'm sure they think
Ted, where does it escalate to, right? The Democrats are kind of shrugging their shoulders. Facebook and Twitter have been as timid as possible to try to have to avoid having to do what they're having to do now. It's 4 months out. It just seems like everything will escalate, and this is the starting point.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the election is itself, I think, almost an irrelevancy. Because Biden is almost, and electoral politics is so bankrupt that it's irrelevant to solving the problems that people actually care about and need help with. So I think politics these days is in the street, and that's where things are going to escalate. I mean, right now, Black Lives Matter owns the streets, and racial grievances are at the top of the agenda. And I wouldn't be surprised if obviously that continues to expand, and it should. But I could see it also expanding into these class issues. The fight against fascism and sort of pseudo-fascist signaling, like we just talked about, and also the poverty and the foreclosures and the evictions that are coming down the line. I think we're going to see a broad-based movement, and I think if Biden wins, that's when the crisis really expands, because people are going to find out that just changing the figurehead at the top is not going to change the nature of the system. They're going to realize that the system itself is the problem, not the personality at the top.
Yeah, and I haven't had the chance to listen to what he actually says in this video here that's being spread around. Jamal Thomas just sharing it with me. I don't know if you saw this, Ted Rawl, but seemingly Joe Biden pointing to a band conductor on a stage quite a bit of time ago, it looks like, but basically kind of pointing and laughing at the 80s. And the guy's dressed in blackface, takes a little bow, and then they go back to talking. Ted Rawl, have you seen this video?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's quite shocking. We'll put it up there. Jamal Thomas.
Yeah, it's shocking.
It's quite shocking to see this.
It is brutally racist. I mean, like people always tell me, "Oh, Joe Biden is not racist. Why do you think Joe Biden is racist?" And I've never really made the argument that Joe Biden was racist. I think I've made the argument that he's done racist things. Like, for example, black folks can't raise their kids. That's deep-seated. Regardless of whether or not he likes a black person or not, he has certain things. In that video, he was basically a black person, a white man in the blackest blackface I've ever seen in my life, with a crowd of all white people who are just laughing at him.
All right. Well, Michelle Whitty just warning that some people may say that it's doctored, but we're going to continue to cover it because I just retweeted it, so people let us know. But if this is a true video, I mean, again, and then it goes kind of what we're talking about, Ted Rawl.
By the way, that's not doctored. That was in C-SPAN.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, if not doctored, incredibly shocking, but it also shows that the power of social media to create videos too will be quite interesting. With that, we do need to leave it here with Ted Rawl, the author and award-winning political cartoonist. Ted, where can people find your new book, Political Suicide: The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party?
There's links through my website, rawl.com, RALL.com.
Fantastic. That was Ted Rawl. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaver here with Jamal Thomas. It's Friday. Time to come at me, bro. If any of you listeners out there want to take any issue with anything I or Jamal Thomas have said this week, give us a call, 202-521-1320. We're getting some maybe clarity on this video. It doesn't make it any better, but apparently the man that he does introduce is in fact black. We're being told it's Jerome Powell, a DC singer. But what he says, Jamal, it's Juneteenth, this video going around. He basically introduces the black guy that's on stage and jokes that it's Michael Jackson. And then he says he'll also later be playing the part of Prince. Just cringe-worthy. Makes it better than the blackface that,
it does.
That some people are allegedly. But it still just feels so gross and disgusting that race to these people is something to laugh about, or it's their own exploratory process. It's Joe Biden. I've never met a black person, and when those kids came up and petted my legs, I just finally understood what they were happening. And Corn Puff, or was it Corn Puff, Cornflakes, whatever the guy's name that he allegedly made up, or whatever it is, everything is through his experience with race. It's never actually simply saying, look, I can't understand what the experience has been for black people in this country. Let me understand it and take a side and let them speak.
No, he
Instead,
lied.
it's always, let me tell you what I know about black people and my understanding of them. And I can go talk to the white segregationists, the white racists, because I get it. I can be the bridge between the blacks and the white segregationists because I'm the good kind of white guy that goes and listens to both sides. And that's what the Democrats play, right? They say, oh, we can talk to the corporatist and the billionaire and the wealthy aristocrat, and we can talk to all the white folks that are meaning well, while at the same time we can talk to the poor black person because we're the bridge out there. And it's BS. You can't be serving both of those populations genuinely and sincerely at the same time without saying to the rich and the powerful, you are abusing and hurting the poor folks out there. And that's where Sanders really fell down, right? We wanted him to say, it's Joe Biden. Say Joe Biden and the Democrats are the ones doing this all. And Sanders refused to take that punch, Jamarl Thomas.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you were in a situation where you needed to clarify and explain to people that the front person of all of the crimes and all of the sins that you put out, because Sanders basically said, you are being screwed over, that they're expropriating your wealth and taking it to the top. And he was right. The problem is he could never say Joe Biden is the front person who said nothing is really going to fundamentally change in the system, that all of you really want things to change. And so it's like, when you can't do that, I mean, not to mention that, lying about civil rights. I have to be honest, everything, the corn pop thing didn't bother me too much. The lying about civil rights, for whatever reason, bothered me more than anything else. I think back to Martin Luther King being dragged into prison with dogs attacking him. And he's like, this is what I must bear for my people. I think of Malcolm X being shot, Medgar Evers being shot, Emmett Till, all of these people being killed in pursuit of civil rights. And Joe Biden comes in and says, yeah, I was part of that. It's
and you see it in live in real time. I got frustrated with one local DC Politico who's running for office tomorrow because he had been basically co-opting a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement protests. They were going to the front of the line. The guy's a developer. The guy's never done any organizing here in his own neighborhood. And now all of a sudden, fist up, he's got the shirt, Black Votes, Black Lives Matter. And then yesterday, about a week ago, I said, hey, maybe just read Alex Vitale's book or listen to an interview we've done on Political Misfits with Alex Vitale, The End of Policing. At least make sure you understand what you're saying, because when you run for political office and you're relatively credible, a lot of people listen to you. A lot of people are going to get mailers from you, political ads from you, emails from you. I always feel you have a responsibility to tell people the truth. Yes. Obviously, I'm quite naive in the political system, but I said, read Alex Vitale's book, The End of Policing. So at least when you say community policing, you know what you're talking about and why that's not a real thing. And they say, well, when am I going to have time? I'm campaigning right now. I can't have time to read. And then yesterday on their social media, they had posted, finally got the new book. It was called How to Brag About Yourself Better. And it was self-promotion, Jamarl. I almost lost myself. It was, I mean, it's just in its live time, right? So, I mean, you have Joe Biden, 40 years of history, 50 years of history doing it, and then you see the same people doing the same thing over and over. Jamarl Thomas, it is time to have a fight. Jamarl Thomas, we got to fight here. I know me and you like to go at each other, but why go at each other when the Democrats are doing some fantastic infighting themselves? Senator Amy Klobuchar announced Thursday she was removing herself as a candidate to be former Vice President Joe Biden's vice presidential pick. I mean, let's all chuckle here first. Klobuchar needed to have removed herself. You're not breaking up with me, Jamarl. I'm breaking up with you.
I'm breaking up with you. I mean, the wild part is she was responsible for Chauvin. Like, she had no chance. Like, any chance that Klobuchar had went up in smoke.
And they already put out like the final six, and she like wasn't part of the final six.
Right,
it's even better here, Jamarl. It goes on here. Amy Klobuchar told MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell she called Biden Wednesday evening with her decision, saying she believes, quote, this is a moment to put a woman of color on that ticket. Klobuchar went on to say, after what I've seen in my state and what I've been seeing across the country, this is a historic moment. America must seize on this moment. There are so many incredibly qualified women, but if you want to heal this nation right now, this is the clue to healing the nation, Jamarl Thomas. My party, yes, but our nation, this sure is a hell of a way to do it, and that's just what I think after being through this in my state. If you want to heal this country, do not pick Elizabeth Warren. I'm pretty sure that's what you just said. Jamarl, how do you feel about this? On the one end, we obviously come at Klobuchar for like, now, wow, just seeing racism in America. It took racism being at your front door, understanding your complicity in it to finally get it. You're finally waking up and saying, oh, this isn't a good moment. Things are bad in this country. So Amy Klobuchar, yeah, get out of here, first of all. And then on the second thing, what did you feel? I got to imagine there was some satisfaction for you for Amy Klobuchar kneecapping Elizabeth Warren on this one.
Right. Right. Because she basically gets, look, Elizabeth Warren, I thought, if of anybody else in that race, deserved the vice presidency spot. Because she was the most shameless and was willing to set her credibility afire for something. I can only assume that it was for the vice presidency spot. I mean, think about it for the moment. Elizabeth Warren gets in the race. She says, I'm against super PACs. I'm against that dark money. I'm against all this stuff. Now, the wild part is she had taken, what, $11 million and dropped it into her race, into her Senate race in order to feather her nest. So she wasn't entirely against it. That was put dark money. But people gave that a pass. Gave it a pass. But the super PAC thing, when she gets on stage and she attacks Sanders, saying Sanders got like 9 super PACs or something, and Sanders doesn't ever say anything. She's like, me and Amy are the only ones who don't have a super PAC. Amy did have a super PAC. And Warren, after grifting for votes, after grifting for money, after grifting for support, after getting people thinking, all right, well, she's kind of like Sanders and they're going to work together. And then she, at the last minute on Super Tuesday, broke, takes a super PAC. And all of those people are like, what? What are you doing? And then she splits the vote. And then she gets out the race. And then that backs Sanders. And people were shell-shocked by that. Because it's like you ran that race grifting for votes from the left, and then the person who the left chose, you basically was bitter, and then turned around and attacked his supporters, the people who you would need to vote for you. Like, it's utterly astonishing what she did in this race. And yet, if you're looking for somebody who might actually have mass appeal for the left, Warren might be the person.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I haven't seen a fight like this between two white women since Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. So kneecap away. Love to see the Democrats fighting. Jamal, I also wanted to just take issue. I know we're beating up on the Democrats quite a bit on this show today. Always happy to do so. I did want to also just, it flew under the radar because we were distracted. Kamala Harris, seemingly here in a new poll, the odds-on favorite, 28% of Democratic voters saying they would like to see Biden pick Senator Harris. Obviously, Warren and Klobuchar getting a lot of fanfare. But I also wanted to talk about 2 other people that were in the final 6 and call BS on it and really make sure people realize the Democrats don't care about you. The Democrats don't care about the left. The Democrats don't care about progressivism, welfare, healthcare, housing, education, or food security for millions of America. They don't care about they care about police and they care about security. And you can see that in the 2 picks that people haven't been talking very much about as potential finalists for the VP pick for Biden. And I think it was kind of signal virtuing in many ways. And I want your thoughts, Jamal, on what signals what virtues they're signaling. One person, Susan Rice, is one of the finalists. She was the U.S. National Security Advisor to Barack Obama from 2013 and 2017. So cool, right? Let's have a security expert who partook in bombing countries around the world, America's clandestine drone program, and oh, hey, someone directly tied to the nonsensical Russiagate hunt through her unmasking of Michael Flynn. And just as bad, the other name that was out there is Representative Val Demings, a representative for Florida's 10th congressional district since 2017. While a Congress member, Speaker Nancy Pelosi appointed Demings to be one of the House impeachment managers. Oh. So great, yet another person tied directly to Russiagate and the efforts to impeach Trump. How is that going to look? And before Congress, most notably, Demings served as chief of the Orlando Police Department from 2007 to 2011. Jamal, this should outrage all of us that these 2 politicians were on the short list of the Democratic Party, putting one of these 2 folks one heartbeat away from the presidency. It speaks volumes who this party is and who comprises their base.
It does. I keep telling people that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are really just one party. Like if you were in China, and yes, it's a authoritarian government, but even within the context of that, I would wager to you that there are gradations in regards to people who tend to trend to the left and trend to the right. Well, in this case, you have the propaganda that there are 2 parties. And so you go in like these 2 things are like vastly different, but they're not. They're actually very narrow. And there's a reason for that in the political science. I mean, basically it allows your government to be somewhat have a certain continuity as opposed to having these like vast shifts in regards to the politics of things. By the same token, you still have a lot of people who left the political process, the overwhelming majority being under $30,000 a year and being people of color, which means that these are Democratic constituencies that no longer participate in the political process because they realized they weren't getting anything out of it. So it's like all of the voter shaming in the world, doesn't get those people back into the process. It's like, you know, you can wring your hands all you want. At the end of the day, having this kind of marginal politics of blue no matter who bleeds off voters, and voters who you need to actually win. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's sad. I mean, they basically, do you remember Klobuchar, the one with no neck, the rich plutocrat who got on MSNBC, and he felt so, feeling his juices so much that he gets on TV and says, if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer uses the term billionaire again, I will close my purse strings. Now that's astonishing, right? I mean, that's basically a rich person who's telling the Democratic Party, I will not give you any money anymore. Which means that to some degree he understands that the money is compels their behavior, which is astonishing. I mean, that's like telling the quiet part aloud. And then the Republican Party, same thing. You had a Republican come out and said, yeah, our donors said that if we, don't pass this tax bill, they're going to close their wallets.
Yeah.
Astonishing.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. One person who loves billionaires, Joe Biden. DJ, our caller, wants to talk a little bit more about Joe Biden himself. DJ, what's happening?
Hey, how's it going? Man, that funny news from Klobuchar in regard to her stepping down actually had a shot. That, I don't know what that was about.
DJ, that is funny when you think about it, right? In those terms, it's like, all right, I don't want you to spend too much time, so I'm just going to take myself out of contention for this. I don't want you to pick me. I don't want you to pick a black woman. Like, you didn't have a chance anyway. What are you talking about? I'm sorry, DJ, go ahead.
Yeah, she caused like well, I'm not going to say a national emergency. This is something that's always been a problem, but her lack of, holding authorities to account for it actually led to this moment that I think we should definitely take advantage of. But Joe Biden is just terrible. Joe Biden's terrible. Kamala Harris is terrible. I think the only quote unquote person of color would be Tulsa Gabbard. Definitely not going to pick her. You can pick almost anyone aside from a cop who she's on record keeping people in prison. But yeah, I was just going back, and I'm sorry to do this, but the show earlier today, I just wanted to praise you for your patience with that guy who was absolutely out of line. He talked about his qualifications more than he actually talked about stuff that he knows. And when you didn't even aggressively challenge him, he was just pushing for you to not challenge him because he didn't want to reveal that he didn't know anything. And I was just like, man, this guy's awesome.
Well,
he's got so much patience.
That's why I always like to coin that, let the weak die off. Because that's basically, it's like, if what you're telling me is my ideological beliefs supersede health, well, then what else is that? I mean, the argument that he was basically making was like the weak die off. It's like, hey, people die, man. It's like, what? What are you talking about? And then he gets mad when I challenge him on it. He's like, he has feelings about it. But yeah, I mean, it's fair rights, right? You're supposed to allow that stuff to take place, so it's good.
Good for you, for your patience, Jamar Thomas.
Yeah.
DJ, thank you for the call.
Yeah.
One piece of breaking news here. Brett Hankinson, who was involved in the killing of Brianna Taylor there in Louisville, has been served his termination letter effective today. That letter reads, he is being fired for an extreme indifference to the value of human life. Quite remarkable there on how basically you can kill somebody, Jamar Thomas, and you get fired. You don't go to jail yet. We're still waiting to know whether or not there'll be charges. We have about 30 seconds left in this segment. Let's slide in one other caller here. Robert, we just have about 30 seconds. If you can be quick, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind?
Hey, there's these times and places where we have to react and do something, like when you see a wipeout at a ball game or you see a hungry kitten and you have milk in your hands. And we're just seeing that our state is not doing that for us. We have our water's getting bad. Our CARES Act turned into the They Don't CARES Act. Our education, social programs, and basic wellness is ignored. Medical research for babies gets the least focus because they make the least income. We really need to do something about that. And I just want to thank you guys for your show and giving us opportunity to make change. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Greatly appreciate it. In Robert's words there, we got to fight on, Jamarl. Thomas, that's not bad for our Come At Me Bro segment here on Friday. Let's take one last break before we close things out for the week. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We have a few more stories that we want to fit in so we don't necessarily miss anything. We want to keep you guys up to date and informed. We have about 10 minutes left in the show. So June 20th is World Refugee Day, and according to the United States, global displacement is hitting record levels. Figures reached 79.5 million in 2019, with 10 million people fleeing in the past year alone. 80 million people, 1% of the total population, are displaced now, nearly double what the figure was in 2010. So the question that you're probably asking, that you're probably thinking, that you're probably pondering at this moment, what's responsible for these spikes? Or better yet, who? Uncle Sam, baby! Please stand up and take a bow, because we are the vast majority, or we have caused the vast majority of the refugees. Syria and Afghanistan. Just great work fueling and maintaining those conflicts. In the case of Afghanistan, for decades, if I'm not mistaken, 2 decades. You've got to hand it to the United States. That's some real commitment to human suffering, and it should be acknowledged and recognized. And where are these refugees going? Mostly to neighboring countries, with Germany as a Western standout, hosting more than 1 million refugees, largely due to the decision to open the borders to Syrian refugees a few years ago. I remember that. They were flooding into Germany. Angela Merkel was asked, will you open the economy? Initially she said no, and then eventually she turned around and said yes. The UN has included displaced Venezuelans in their figures, saying 3.7 million Venezuelans are displaced, with many in Cuba and Uruguay. I'm not sure how many of those displaced people are Venezuelans overseas without access to consular service, since the United States tried to install Juan Guaido as president there and is now stuck, with many of our allies recognizing a government that doesn't exist. But our brutal economic sanctions on Venezuela are certainly not helping the people there either. Sanctions, after all, are an act of war. So what in the world what is the world doing to support these refugees? Very little. Only 107,000 refugees resettled in third world countries last year, with Canada receiving the most, 31,100. The United States received only the second highest number, with 27,500 resettled in 2019. Put that in perspective for the moment. The United States goes into a country, destroys it, meaning Iraq, kills 1 million people in that country, sends tens of thousands flooding into the surrounding countries. The next president comes in, drone bomber in chief, not to mention some of those bombing strikes killed like 90%, meaning you are not even hitting terrorists at that point. You're just randomly, every so often hitting a terrorist, you're just murdering the population. These people rationally ran to get away from our bombs and our chaos, especially in the context of Syria. Obama was responsible for 500,000 deaths in that country as he tried to topple that government while lying that there are no boots on the ground. $1 billion. And those people, rational actors, went flooding into Europe. destabilizing the politics of Europe. You must understand, like, we destroyed those countries, and Europe basically paid for it in regards to the destabilization of that country, of that continent. The UN Secretary General today called for the world to work an end to conflict and persecution that drives refugee numbers and invest in countries that they're fleeing to. I don't know, though, what's more immediately profitable, selling weapons to sides on every conflict, or investing in precarious, war-torn economies. You tell me, Bob, which one is it? Which one is more advantageous? Investing into communities that we might have aggrieved and we might have caused all sorts of harm, or supplying weapons to both sides of the conflict?
Yeah, well, when we're playing capitalism, we're going to always keep our money and cause chaos elsewhere. It's amazing, too, like the PR machine of the United States, that we could cause so much damage around the world and then try to somehow blame others there. I mean, like in Venezuela, as you talk about, displacing Venezuelans had to flee to Uruguay and Colombia. And then all the news was like, Colombia is this home democracy where they're welcoming all of these people from Venezuela fleeing Maduro. And it's like U.S. sanctions led to Colombia having no choice but to open up their borders and allow safe haven, because their economy and their well-being with their neighbor is important for them to have continued trade and good diplomatic relations. And so instead of creating pure chaos, they're doing everything they can to take these people in. But the United States, Monroe Doctrine at hand, are basically causing all these damages and getting people to avoid it. Jamal Thomas, I had to get to this question, this last story here for the week. You want to do it, or you want me to do it?
I want to do it. You know, I look like a younger man when I do it.
Get us some Roswell news here before we get out of here.
All right, so President Donald Trump sat down for a Father's Day interview with son, Donald Trump Jr. The president was asked if he'd let us know if there were aliens and whether he'd finally tell the public what really went down in Roswell, New Mexico. Trump Sr. said, "I won't talk to you about what I know, but it's very interesting." The president said Roswell is a very interesting place, he said, and he'd think about declassifying information about the site. As we all know, in 1947, a rancher near Roswell found debris in the field that he couldn't figure out. Air Force officials first said it was a weather balloon. Actually, they didn't say first it was a weather balloon. Actually, they said it was a crashed craft in the newspapers, and then they turned around and said it was a weather balloon, just as accuracy. Then decades later, they were found, from an atomic project. Well, we all, of course, know it was a crashed UFO, as confirmed by the movie Independence Day. I love that. You know, the wild part about the Roswell thing is that we are supposed to believe that these military personnel who deal with weather balloons could not identify a weather balloon until the next day. Also, when you look at the paper, there's been analysis of the paperwork that the guy had, the general at the time where they've taken a picture, and you could see the words that the weather balloon was not part of it. Like, so the Roswell thing is really fascinating. There are people who supposedly have some of the materials and whatnot. It is unclear to me. I think a craft went down, and so does some of the scientists that have investigated, like Stanton Friedman. Friedman is a hard-nosed scientist. He's dead at this point, but he wrote the book on Roswell, and it's phenomenal. So Trump, I don't know what Trump knows. I don't know if Trump is lying to me. Trump is a flagrant liar. But Trump has been asked this question on UFOs like 3 times. And the first time, he said he didn't believe it, but he believed the pallets and the craft. I don't know how you do both of those. Another time, Chuck Todd, your guy, asked him, in which case he wouldn't necessarily, he got kind of clammy, he wouldn't own up to it. And this time around. And this time he's answered a little bit more like, yeah, there's some interesting stuff there, but I can't tell you what it is. Thanks, Trump.
Yeah, I can't wait for Donald Trump to come out with his memoir when he's done being president, The Truth on Donald Trump, and watch all the liberals clamor for it to finally get the truth, and then Donald Trump will somehow become a hero of liberals.
Yeah, he will.
Remarkable. I'm sure he's working on that tell-all book right now. Jamal Thomas, we're done. We did it. That's another week in the books for Political Misfits. We'll be back with you on Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great holiday today, all you fine folks out there. Hope you enjoyed the weekend as well. Thank you to our guests today, Alina Piva, Eteng Etta, and Ted Rawl. Big thank you to all of them for joining us. As always, thank you to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team for keeping us live on the radio here in Washington, D.C. Shout out to our producer, as always, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always...
Thank you very much.
Whoa, what is that?
Soon to become Prince, as I just pointed out.
Well, that was weird. Guys, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys joining me for the show. Yeah, the stuff this morning... Look, Fault Lines is just a different show. And there are times where I engage pretty heavily with the audience member. But in that one, I was just pissing him off. And I would rather not piss him off and him to make his point. And then just try to destroy his point. And so between those two things, I didn't necessarily see it was getting contentious. That's why I just left it. But the point that I was trying to make is the notion that you're going to prioritize your dollars or your ideology over life is nonsense. And making an argument about driving a car 10 miles an hour in no way applies to a coronavirus. Here's the catch. You could drive your car 15 miles an hour and be just as safe, or 20, or 30, or 40. There's a subjective period in that where you can go a particular speed and be safe. That has nothing to do with COVID-19. The notion, or what he's trying to, I guess, get the point of, hey, you can open the economy to some degree. No. What he wants to say is let the weak die off. Own that. If that's what it, like, I can't say you're wrong because that's just your point of view in regards to what you're willing to accept for your cash thing. But I do prefer you owning that because that looks utterly disgusting. The notion that you're perfectly willing to let people die for cash. I also have another announcement. This was my last show for Political Misfits. I will be taking over Fault Lines. And yeah, it's weird. It's my baby, so I feel awkward. But I was given the option for promotion, and I took it. So I wanted to do both, but the team wasn't on board for it and didn't want to talk to me about it. So I just basically went to where I thought I was valued. But I want to thank all of you for making this show what it was. I mean, the engagement you guys had up to like 500 views when we first started the show at the radio station, and even when we left and had to do it on the on the fly, I think we dropped it to be 200-300. But that number was directly impinged upon just based on the situation itself. Ultimately, though, you guys definitely make the show a success, and I want to thank you for all of your support for doing so. Maggie Smith, thank you for naming it. Political Misfits, that's where it came from. So I say this with a huge, heavy heart on this, because honestly, I really wanted to do both. I thought, I just thought wrong. My perspective of it is different. I look at a lot of stuff through the lens of loyalty and that type of stuff, and that stuff doesn't necessarily work because not everybody has the similar value system on that. I wanted to do both because I felt like I had loyalties to both. I felt like I had loyalties to Fault Line because when I first started on Fault Lines, that was where I cut my teeth. The awkwardness of that is because Garland was not there, and it feels weird. It's like having sex with your best friend's girlfriend or something. It's like that's a no-go. But at that point, it was somewhat of a moot point. I mean, at that point, Garland was no longer part of the show. And the last thing I wanted is to go into disrepute. And so I have a high opinion of myself, even if other people don't. And I thought that if we were going to have the best option for that show to be the flagship show, I should take it. I thought, mistakenly, that it would be a situation where I would be wanted on this one also. Like where it would just be kind of something that we can work out where the time frame and everything else in preparation. That wasn't an option. So I'll end this here. And you guys will see me at 7 a.m. on Monday on Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. And by the way, you'll see me later today unless I conk out. Apparently my wife was telling me I look like hell earlier. So she was like, I gotta get you some coffee. You look like hell. You look like hell. To be fair, I've been up for 3 days. The last time I went to bed, I think I nodded off like an hour and then had to get back up to do fault lines in the morning. So if I look a little haggardly, that's where that's coming from. But I'm wide awake. It just apparently look bad. But like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in a few.